So, good afternoon everyone and welcome to today's EAUC webinar. The title of today's webinar is Preventing Food Waste Equals Reduced Costs and will last approximately an hour. It is in the Resource Efficiency and Waste and the Procurement and Supplier Engagement Frameworks. And these can be found, more information about these can be found on the live section of our website. Thank you for registering, and thanks also to today's speakers. So we have Catherine Warren, who's here representing RAP, and then we also have Nick Johnson and Les Carmichael, who are here from Swansea University. Welcome to you all. My name's Emma, and I am the Member Events and Communities Officer here at the EAUC. If you have any specific event, webinar or training requests, I'll be happy to talk to you at any time. I also work with our community groups, so as a member of the EAUC, I encourage you to join one of these communities of practice or regional groups. Again, more information can be found on our website, more specifically under the Member Zone. You may have previously attended or heard of exchange webinars. These are continuing, but due to their popularity, we have developed a new range of EAUC webinars. These are for EAUC members only and are an added benefit to your membership. They are more detailed with clear learning outcomes and expert speakers and allow for more complex topics. Shortly after today's webinar has finished, you will receive a certificate of attendance to place on your personal development file as a record of today's webinar training. So there's just a little bit of housekeeping to go over now before I pass on to our speakers. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me well. I have muted you all. This is just to avoid any background noise, and you'll continue to be muted throughout today's webinar until the end when there is opportunity to ask any questions. If you are having any technical issues throughout the webinar, please let me know either by posting in the on-screen chat box or sending me an email to easton@eauc.org.uk, and my details are actually on screen at the moment. Hopefully most of you do have working microphones. Don't worry if you don't. As I said earlier, there's still opportunity to ask any questions through the chat box, either during the webinar if there's a specific point that you'd like to make, or at the end when we can have more of a general discussion of questions. Please feel free to share the link that I'll be sending to you later to the recorded webinar today. This will be uploaded onto the Sustainability Exchange and the EAUC website later on, and as I mentioned, I'll be sending you the link to this recording. Once this webinar is finished today, you'll be sent a short survey. This is just for us to gain your feedback, and it really helps in terms of improving our webinar events and CPD training. So that's all from me for now. Thank you again for registering, and I will now pass you over to Catherine.
Okay, thanks Emma. Good afternoon everyone, and thanks for joining us today on the webinar. My name is Catherine Warren and I'm a Resource Efficiency Advisor, and I'm delivering this webinar today on behalf of RAP. So the agenda for today: first of all, I'll give a short introduction to RAP and the work that they do. I'll then be providing you with some facts and figures about how much food is wasted in the education sector. I'll then introduce you to RAP's Hospitality and Food Service Agreement, and then I'll be passing over to Les and Nick here at Swansea University, and they'll be telling us a little bit more about some of their successes in reducing food waste and increasing recycling. And then finally, to wrap up, I'll be signposting you to some of RAP's resources which can help you with your own actions to reduce food waste. And then, as Emma said, we'll have some time for questions at the end. Okay, so first of all, for those of you not familiar with RAP are the Waste and Resources Action Programme. And RAP have a vision, which is a world in which resources are used sustainably. And RAP work across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, working with businesses, local authorities, communities and individuals to reap the benefits of reducing waste, developing sustainable products and using resources in an efficient way. Okay, so here's some information to start off with about the overall UK hospitality and food service sector. Well, we know that as a sector, as a whole, serves a staggering 8 billion meals each year, and associated with that is over 2.87 million tonnes of food and its associated packaging waste. Research undertaken by RAP to identify the true cost of food waste within this sector has identified that over half of this waste, so 54% of this waste, is still disposed of to landfill. So this is the equivalent to 1 in 6 meals that are served out of those 8 billion meals. 1 in 6 of those is wasted. And the average cost of that avoidable food waste is estimated as 38p per meal. So drilling down a little bit more specifically to your sector in education, the education sector serves over 1,100 million meals per year, and that is actually, quite surprisingly, that's 14% of all of the meals that we eat outside of the home in the UK each year. The education sector themselves produce over 210,000 tonnes of waste each year in the UK. Of that is 123,000 tonnes is food waste. And currently, RAP research has shown that the sector is recycling 23% of their waste, and only 8% of food waste is currently composted or sent for recycling via anaerobic digestion. So you can see there's a lot of room for improvement there. So again, to break this down into food terms, of all of the food purchased by the education sector, by weight, only 81.9% of that food is actually consumed, and 18.1% of that food is actually wasted. And then we talk about food waste in two different ways. We call it avoidable food waste and unavoidable. So when we say avoidable food waste, what we mean here is the food waste that is actually edible and could have been eaten if it had perhaps been better portioned, better managed, or better stored and prepared. What we call the unavoidable food waste, it's food waste that isn't edible under normal circumstances. So that's your bones from your meat, eggshells, tea bags, vegetable peelings, and that kind of thing, which is not really avoidable. So you can see there that quite a big chunk of that food waste could have been eaten. If we talk about this in monetary terms, the cost of food waste to the education sector is estimated to be £250 million. Now this might seem quite a high figure, but if you take into account that RAP's research also considers other costs such as the cost of the whole sector supply chain, so that's the food purchase, that's the waste management costs, energy and water use, that's labour, administration and transport. So if you just think about the labour cost alone that's associated with the preparation and cooking and transporting the food, and the cost of purchasing the food that is never actually eaten and wasted, then you can see how that figure starts to make a bit more sense. So every tonne of food waste is costing an average £2,100, and that equates to 22p per meal for every meal served. But in addition to the financial, the monetary cost, there's obviously a carbon and an environmental impact associated with this waste. So for every tonne of that avoidable food waste, which we said would cost £2,100, it's also responsible for the equivalent of 4.2 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So what RAP has done is had a closer look of what's actually in the food waste from the UK education sector. So what this graph shows you is the quantity of different types of food waste. For example, we've got potato waste, we've got bakery products, fruits and vegetables, and all the other different food types in there. And what perhaps is most interesting is that RAP's research shows that most of this waste is avoidable. So again, going back to the last slide, only 18.1% of this waste could be considered unavoidable. So this type of analysis is actually very useful to do at a local level. So say, for example, that you did the same analysis and you identified that the largest percentage of your food waste was fruit and vegetables, then perhaps that could suggest you have some issues with stock management or perhaps poor presentation of fruits and vegetables during meal times. So doing this kind of analysis can help you sort of understand what's in your food waste in a bit more detail. Okay, so what can we do with all of this food waste? In resource efficiency, as I'm sure you're aware, we often talk about waste treatment in terms of the waste hierarchy. And what the waste hierarchy does is it outlines the preferred options for dealing with food waste. And what we have on this slide is the waste hierarchy, which is applied specifically to food and drink. So at the top of the waste hierarchy, the very best option is prevention. So in terms of this food waste, it's not producing that food waste in the first place. That's the best option. The second best option in terms of food and drink waste is optimization. So what we mean by that is trying to redistribute any surplus food waste so that it can be eaten by other people, so it's optimizing that as a resource. And the next best option is recycling, and with food waste that can either be done by composting or by recycling food waste into energy via an anaerobic digestion process. Then the next preferred option is recovery. So in this case, it could be sending your food waste off to an energy from waste facility, which would recover some of that energy in the food waste. And finally, the very last option is disposal, which could be landfill, it could be disposing of waste to sewers, or sending it to incineration, but without any form of energy recovery. So that outlines sort of steps, the order of preference when making decisions on how to deal with food waste. Okay, so sort of in response to this research and the information that I've presented about the sort of scale of the problem in this sector, what RAP has developed is a hospitality and food service agreement. This is a voluntary agreement, and it has two sort of overriding targets, and the first of which is prevention. So as I said, prevention is obviously the best option, try not to produce that food waste in the first place. So the target is to reduce food and its associated packaging waste by 5% by the end of 2015. And this will be measured against a baseline that was set in 2012 and also measured by CO2 emissions. And then the second target is waste management. And the agreement is aiming to increase the overall rate of food and packaging waste that's being recycled or sent to anaerobic digestion or composting to at least 70% by the end of 2015. Okay. So to date, the Hospitality and Food Service Agreement has signatories and supporters, two different types of ways of signing up to the agreement. Large businesses, so those with more than 250 employees, which would obviously include universities and colleges, if you sign up, you're required to report annually on your progress against the targets, and you would also be allocated a key account manager who will work with you to develop a tailored program to help your specific actions to reduce waste. Smaller businesses, so those with less than 250 employees, whilst they're not required to report annually, they can still participate and access a lot of free material online to support them in implementing their waste prevention plans. So this slide here just gives some examples of some of the signatories to the agreement, and that includes Swansea University, of course. We've got Loughborough University, Exeter University, and you can see some of the other types of organisations on there. They are the signatories, so they are the ones that have signed up and committed to help RAP achieve those targets. But then we also have supporters. So supporters to the agreement, other organisations, of course, such as Environmental Association for University and Colleges and University Catering Organisation. Another supporter, don't think they're on here, but it's Plan Zeros, that's Heroes but with a Z in front of it. They're working on updating their surplus food redistribution online map so that it's easier to use. That's going to be done in January. And they'll be developing a pack for anyone to use who's interested in setting up their own local networks. So I would recommend having a look at their website, which is planzeros.org, and to have a look at that. So how else are RAP engaging the sector? Well, signatories, as we've mentioned, are working to implement their plans to reduce food waste and recycle more. There's the online tools, which I'll come back to a bit later, and there's also some established working groups who are working in specific areas such as procurement and packaging, and of course other things such as today's webinar to try and share good practice. And that's why now I'm going to be handing you over. Just change the slides here. I've got two colleagues from Swansea University here. First of all, we're going to be hearing from Nick, who is going to be talking about reducing food waste and increasing recycling. And then we'll be hearing from Les, who is in the catering department. So I'm going to hand you over to Nick and just ask some questions to Nick about what Swansea University has done so far. So first of all, Nick, can you tell us a little bit more about your sustainability policy that you have in place?
Sure, certainly. Thank you, Catherine. I hope you can all hear me. My name is Nick Johnson, Sustainability Officer at Swansea University. Yes, some really interesting statistics there, Catherine. So, yes, we're a sustainability team at Swansea University. You know, we realise that we have a very important role to play in the promotion and practice of sustainability at Swansea University, and we have a very clear set out policy. As part of this, the university has a commitment to increase waste prevention, the reuse, the recycling and recovery of waste wherever possible, obviously including food, which is what we're talking about today. Sustainable practices are increasingly being mainstreamed within the higher education sector. Swansea University already has a great deal of experience in managing cutting-edge research into sustainability and is leading the way with a number of innovations that have been introduced on campus. For instance, the university was the first in Wales to achieve fair trade status, which was superb. Green impact teams and Eco Campus, which we are holders of a Platinum Award.
Okay. So when you put your team together, which I understand was around 3 years ago, what was your sort of initial priorities for your team?
Yeah, well, it's slight correction. I'm in the company of my line manager, Dr. Heidi Smith, who put this team together. So I'm part of that team. We set it up 3 years ago. Still an effort to improve all areas of sustainability at the university. At the time, it consisted of the sustainability manager, Dr. Heidi Smith, and one officer who isn't present at the moment. It wasn't myself. The team has now grown to 3 officers, including myself, with the additional temporary assistance from 2 change agents and many placement students over the years.
Okay.
Sort of, within a 2-year period, the work coordinated with the team has led to improvement in many areas. We've had an impressive climb over 2 years, from a failing actually to a first class in the Guardian newspaper's Green League. We actually do know that we've done even better this year, which is fantastic news. We actually rose, first of all, from 52 places in 2012, an additional 21 places in 2013. We also managed 14 work streams. Obviously waste being one of these, and a huge focus on food. In addition, one of our work streams involves sustainable procurement and food, and the issues associated with this fall under both of these work streams at the moment.
Okay, that's fantastic, and some really good achievements there already. But what's your sort of current focus at the moment?
Well, within the Green League, the Higher Education Statistics Agency, HESA, and other reporting, waste is continually one of the areas that have been shown not to be improving at the rate of other areas. We take this very, very seriously. The Green League, which will be published next week, and we've sort of been unofficially informed that we've done very well in and better than previous years. We're reporting a particular scope and time frame for waste. 2012-2013, it appears to be poor. We're very disappointed in the effect this will have of limiting our progress in the table. So we want to put a huge focus this year and the coming years on that. Waste is therefore seen as a priority within this area, with the greatest opportunity for improvement to bring us in line with performance reported by other universities.
Okay, that's brilliant. And we saw earlier that obviously Swansea University are a signatory of RAP's Hospitality and Food Service Agreement. So could you tell us a little bit about first why you joined up and what the benefits of being a member have provided you?
Yeah, the obvious benefits really. We signed up to the agreement as we were particularly keen to tackle issues related to food and food-related waste, and the realisation of the potential to drive down costs in doing so, which is one of the main benefits. Also, the catering department, Les and his crew, have been a great ally for us, the sustainability team, with our drive, and we're really keen, and we will do, to continue the work with them and improving these areas where we can. You know, two of the main benefits, obviously, which we're very keen on, and I'm sure the Les is, you know, is cost savings and driving innovation into the higher education sector.
Okay. But it sounds like you're doing some fantastic stuff, but I appreciate it can't have been easy. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here and get you to tell us a little bit more about some of the challenges that you've faced before telling us a bit more about your current recycling campaigns and further commitments.
Yeah, certainly. Challenges, daily challenges. Our recycling rate, you know, which we're not particularly pleased about, is around about 40% at the moment. Some of them, you know, some of the boundaries are measured within, some uncontrollable at the moment, but being managed far stringently these days. You know, our current target is to achieve 55% recycling as soon as possible, and zero waste to landfill is another target by 2015. Catering, as I said earlier, you know, we work very well with them. We've worked hard on portion sizes, looking at packaging, staff commitment very, very high to waste minimisation. The university has really stepped up its recycling policy and collection points throughout the university, mapping for this for mixed recycling now in every department. The campaigns and road shows, the Love Food, Hate Waste campaign, as an example, you know, we're sort of regular supporters of within the university.
Okay, and some of your commitments, you've obviously got your environmental management system in place, and I think, is it right, you're about to start a food waste collection?
Yeah, we've done you know, we've done numerous campaigns. We intend to work, you know, and focus much harder on the educational side going forward now. As an example, more toolbox talks rather than sort of, you know, we've done various, you know, we call people in and run seminars for us, etc. But we sort of sat around and discussed that, you know, we can toolbox talk, keeping it simple is far more effective way forward. We have a green guide which is designed ourselves, which shows every conceivable material that can be disposed of and how to do this. But this may be too, like, you know, perhaps too, you know, unwieldy, and we need to be more of a flow chart, perhaps even an app to get right up with technology and what the user, you know, the end user is using today, which is you know, mobile phones, etc., you know, computers. So we see as online and apps the way forward. We have a much improved infrastructure on campus. Recycling facilities have been introduced in the university, residencies, and the sports centre, which is a leading light year really for us, which already seems well supported. We intend to do, you know, much more with our new waste management contract in place from March 2015, which we will be segregating food. We need to work better with our contractors, particularly our waste contractor, and monitor waste streams much more accurately, measurement, and monitor these, you know, far more data in real time as well.
Okay.
The new contract has been built with recycling targets, zero waste to landfill, and other aspirations such as the need for continuous improvement and far more innovation on campus regarding waste.
Okay. Just before we hand over to Les, just one more question for you. And you mentioned earlier at the IPC Games you looked at food waste separation. Could you just briefly touch on that? Yeah,
the IPC International Paralympic Committee was a disabled games which the university hosted last summer. We decided to segregate waste within those games. We successfully segregated some food waste. However, you know, there was still some food waste in other bins, contaminated waste streams. So although we were doing quite well with the segregating, we were still finding that there was a lot of other bins where food was contaminated in those areas. So we've learned a lot of lessons, which is what we set out to do really. So we weren't too disappointed, but we intend to use these in the future to help develop food segregations with other events. Certainly with the scale of the event as well, you know, we're very pleased. The International Paralympic Committee Games, the IPC, assurance that we need to look continuing at labelling and of course education. We found that simple and clear instructions and infrastructure is the best way forward, just visual and simple. We surveyed hundreds of people at the games and asked if they understood the system, They said they do. We handed out sort of lanyards or little maps, little key maps, which worked very, very well. They understood the system, but as I said previously, there was still some evidence of users not following through with their understanding. So I think, you know, we've realised that there's gaps between what people say and what they do. Say what they do and what they actually do. Sort of psychology behind disposing of your waste, you know, is a really keen focus for us here, me in particular. Our green impact teams, you know, absolutely superb. We've got 38 teams now which we've built waste and food into these schemes, which we weren't doing previously, so we have now. And we have a team of waste auditors on campus as well. So, so they support us going forward as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Nick. We're going to pick up towards the end on some more of these actions and what you can do in your organisations. But next we're going to have Les Carmichael, who is the catering manager here at Swansea University. So I'm going to hand you over, Les.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're going to hear me loud and clear. What I'd like to do, I mean, I'd like to actually turn it from a catering perspective, give you where we are as an overview to our actual sort of operations here. Campus catering, I actually sort of head up with a team of around about 5 managers actually and about 80 staff. We actually operate a variety of restaurants, coffee shops on the university campus, which includes things like Costa, Starbucks. We have an art centre, a food mall, a noodle bar. We even actually cater at the Welsh National Pool. We have the capacity to produce up to 7,000 meals a day and recently achieved this, as my colleague Nick mentioned, in the IPC European Games, which we hosted in August, which was obviously around about 7,000 meals, which was a real sort of challenge for everyone here, but we did it successfully. We actually work in collaboration, obviously, with our sustainability team, and that's worked remarkably well. They actually support me as an actual department, and vice versa in that respect. I mean, it's worked, and you can see that Nick has actually turned around and basically sort of just fitted into this new role, and again, it's massively supportive, along with Dr. Heidi Smith. So we currently cater for students here, staff, international guests, and the general public. In addition to this, we provide event and hospitality catering, and it's massively, massively diverse. Well, we currently produce in excess of around about over 1 million meals a year, actually, which is quite a task. I have a budget for just over around about 3 million, and it's rising actually because we are actually expanded. We purchase approximately around about £1.25 million worth of food and beverages, which is massively significant. And obviously, one of the things that really sort of questioned me with regards to food wastage is obviously that, you know, we're under complete, like the rest of all caterers and commercial businesses out there, are under the cosh with regards to commercial viability and financial viability at that. So with regards to that, you know, expanding on the restaurants and what we offer, the venue which we have here is a food mart. That offers a variety of daily menu products such as pastas and fresh fish and salads, jacket potatoes. One of the things that we got in another cafe called Fusion, which is quite close proximity to that, serves things like traditional breakfast, authentic or Asian cuisine, and quite recently we've just actually developed a Malaysian sort of actual international sort of cuisine for a lot of our actual sort of international guests, which has been very well attended actually, and sort of it's taken up really well. We have things like specialty coffee shops, which I mentioned. Taliesin Theatre, for instance, offers a daily carvery menu and traditional local made cakes, so we actually expand our actual usage for any local produce that we can possibly can. A part of our portfolio, again, we also have a variety of vending machines, which includes about 50, and throughout the campus we provide a 24/7 service in that respect. And also we recently developed an in-house brand really, which is called Glass, and we have 2 units with regards to that, which expands our noodle concept and various other things. In terms of volumes of students, we have 16,000, 2,500 staff, and a catering workforce with 80, which are contracted. But again, you know, in the terms of IPC games, we expanded a workforce with an additional sort of agency staff to approximately about 150. So basically, we doubled that workforce, which takes a lot of actual managing, but nevertheless, you know, we did it successfully. With regards to that, the main aims and objectives really that we really set ourselves up for, because we are far from the actual finished product with regards to a national department. Again, we've had resources which have actually been expanded, and I mentioned our sustainability team, which have actually given us guidelines, I think, in a lot of things that we've achieved. And we things, we were definitely a sustainably driven department, and things that Nick mentioned earlier on. We became the first fair trade university in Wales, which we're very, very proud at. There were things like passing fads which we expected, like fair trade going back 7-8 years ago, possibly could have been. And I think everybody we took the actual, the bull by the horns in that respect, and drove that actual concept. And ultimately we can see now that even the likes of Cadbury's actually got fair trade logos wherever they actually can, and they chocolate bars. So ultimately, there is a massive demand for fair trade products. And of course what has helped actually with regards to that is the fact that everybody's got this awareness factor on what fair trade actually stands for, really. In that respect, I mean, we looked at in Wales, that we looked at things like food waste legislation, potential changes, whereas, it's not good practice to be putting food waste down the actual waste disposals. They've changed that legislation in Scotland. I know that I've actually had conversations and meetings with local government officials looking at white paper introductions and to change potential food legislation in terms of food wastage, which at the end of the day is a proactive part of the business. We wanted to be actually proactively minimising wastage. I know that these things have actually been mentioned earlier on, and ultimately this is one of the reasons why the actual aims and objectives were going to be driving us actually. So we introduced a food waste audit procedure, which monitors our operations, also identifies any major waste food issues. We looked at things like menu development, and we looked at rationalising our menus, and that gave us greater food waste control. We looked at batch cooking, so production was always an important part of that actual process. And things like we introduced, as an example, more carvery actual facilities in our actual areas, where it helped to minimise waste, because things like expensive meats were being utilised for other dishes under actual controlled environments, obviously. But then what we did look at to measure that, we actually weighed our food wastage, and we looked at that and introduction of these measures to our units. So we looked at that then really to look at any reduction. We did find we did start the actual wastage and weight scenario, where we actually reduced our food waste by about 20%, which was fantastic in the first instance. So we followed a review of the catering activities on campus and introduced food waste audit procedures, as I mentioned. A number of simple zero-cost and low-cost measures were implemented to reduce food waste. And these have included a procurement saving, really, annually of around about £10,000, which is no main feat. It's a real good driver for us. And I get called all the type things under the world in my one of my hats. And for me to save £10,000 on our actual budget, it really allowed us to do other things, really. So some of the examples that we had then, really, as I mentioned, we rationalised our actual menus, which we looked at then reducing the supplier deliveries, using local supplies wherever possible. And that then had an actual positive effect of reducing the carbon footprint, really, which was massively important to us. The use of reusable and returnable packaging was also encouraged. And examples for that, where we could actually minimise plastics for use as an example, we'd encourage more biodegradable products than that. And where it was appropriate, for instance, in our food miles, some of our staff got a tendency to actually put waste, biodegradable cups, for instance, out in our actual, in our actual units. And where it was possible, we would actually take those away, so we just would drive the non-usage of actual biodegradable and in actual packaged products, really. Things that we looked at then, for instance, as an example, and a small example of this was really, we used to look at monthly stock check in order to identify wastage. And as an example for that, we would have, our actual chefs would order bananas, for instance, on a Friday. And ultimately, really, if they were left then for the weekend, we find that by Monday that would then possibly be wasted. So what we did with that was to actually minimise orders, really, and not take orders on a Friday. So basically, we resulted in a 5 kilogram reduction per week, which doesn't sound a lot, but ultimately it was around about things like a £250 annual saving, which when you add it to the actual costs, in the totality of that, it really, and as well as that, the actual wastage was cut, which was really beneficial financially and also from a food waste perspective. I mean, with regards to menu development as well, I mentioned about rationalisation. Another example we did in our Fusion Cafe, we were actually having things like 6 main courses per evening, and we reduced that down to 4. And we looked at the food waste with regards to that, and that was really cut by 30%. And that was primarily due to reduced end-of-service surplus, really. So ultimately, we had measurable situations with auditing procedures and staff culture, which I'll come on to in a little while, was actually really enhanced for that, because you could actually see there was a massive improvement in that, really, and as well as I said, the financial benefits to that. I mean, the processes that we also looked at, really, was a number of portions, as an example, again, that we sent to satellite units. And the Welsh National Pool was an example there, really. You know, I did find out that we would actually send in, for instance, like, you know, examples of that would be like tuna fish and baked beans and cheese to go with baked potatoes. And they were sending in the region of around about 10 portions of each day. And it was a situation where, you know, they managed to reduce that down to 3 or 4. And again, you know, further portions were actually supplied and demand, really, which we changed the ethos of that. And this approach, again, led to a reduction in the wasting. We were saving around about 40 portions a week, which were being wasted, you know, with my sort of, you know, respondents. And again, you know, the savings, again, for that, you know, again, was a major drive for me. We actually worked out and projected that we were actually saving around about £800 a year. Again, when you add that to things like bananas and other actual sort of, you know, process changes, that was remarkable, really. And also, again, you know, the kudos of reducing wastage. And it comes back to the first points of actually turning around and looking at the processes to get to that stage without actually sort of then controlling the wastage factors after the event. So we also looked at things like, you know, in processes of improvement of communication, which was really important to actually get our staff engaged with that, really. And for instance, we had a lot of, you know, unit supervisors, you know, which helped minimise that waste, because those guys are actually on the coal face, and they see exactly what's selling, what isn't selling, and ultimately, you know, sharing their actual thoughts in terms of actual communication sort of strategies, and that would work out in supervisor meetings, and then cascading that down to actual communication forums, really, with our staff. And they started to get that, really, because obviously they could see the waste minimisation, really, which was really down to over-ordering, I guess, and really that was one of the parts of that really did help, and certainly engaging staff and supervisors and managers were part of that process. We also looked at things like production, which again, I touched on earlier on. I think, you know, production methods were reviewed and improved, which include really sort of greater use of batch cooking, and I mentioned earlier on about a noodle sort of concept that we got. And we bought new equipment, such as, you know, brack pans to actually look at sort of stir frying, and obviously the noodle bar I mentioned is immensely successful. That leads to things like, you know, greater efficiencies, which I mentioned. And we looked at things like, you know, labour reductions, and it helped really with regards to sort of like batch cooking, fresher products, which engaged then with the things that we got, like we obtained an actual Solid Association sort of, you know, food award, and that was all about emphasis on greater criteria, really, of actually reducing sort of fresher produce. So it minimised things like obviously reheating of food, which again sort of had major benefits in things like sort of food safety, you know, where we'd actually batch cook it, which really is a great sort of concept for us, and it obviously keeps the environmental health officers really happy as well, because, you know, they've nothing better than actually cooking and serving fresh food. And again, you know, that had a real sort of good sort of production sort of for us, and our income in that area is actually up by 20% on last year, so it's obviously having a great sort of actual financial benefit to our commercial business. So we looked at things like food cooked closer to service times, allowing for variables, things such as weather and events on site to be taken into account. So we do sort of do a lot of research in that respect. And again, you know, this turned into a leading of less food waste at the end of service, and I think ultimately we could utilise, and we have got areas where we do transfer food, and as long as it's actually under the actual food safety control measures, then, you know, everybody's happy with regards to that. Simplistic things we looked at as well with food production, things and which really drove from the system, you know, the actual Soil Association of food award that we had. An example for that, really, which to my sort of, you know, as an ex-chef in my previous life, gravies, for instance, you know, weren't being made from scratch and using sort of meat stocks, and now that they definitely are, which again, you know, the meat stocks were actually thrown away, which was, you know, absolutely completely sort of unbelievable, really, in that respect. But it did drive those actual things, and, you know, it enabled then the fresh products to be utilised. Again, which minimised and sort of saved cost, minimised, you know, packaging, because we didn't sort of buy that actual sort of product, and ultimately you get a fresher product. So of course the customer, and I'm certainly happy with regards to the results for that. Another example as well, and from production techniques really, we introduced things like new curry recipes, because we do utilise a lot of curries here, probably like a lot of commercial businesses, and especially in higher education. Again, you know, they use things like fresh herbs and spices rather than bought-in curry sauces. And that's led to about 150 sort of less bottle sauces being procured. And again, the overall sort of saving for that was probably £600 and rising, because the actual curries are actually selling more. So, you know, it's probably best part of £1,000 saved there just on actual curries alone, because of the product that we're actually using and the you know, the turnover of that product alone. Another simplistic one was, again, and I'm sorry to bore you with these details, perhaps I think it's really good from a catering perspective, and a real simplistic one that we had really, with the drive of new carveries really, you know, we needed things like, you know, stuffings were being used, you know, actually go with turkey and pork, which are really popular here. And we were using things like, you know, crusts of bread, which were actually being thrown out. And again, we overviewed that, and ultimately now the bread is, and those crusts are used to actually turn around. We actually grow our own fresh herbs on site. So we actually use that product. It's a fresher product. The breadcrumbs are used in the crusts, and they would have been previously wasted. So with the, you know, actual herbs and the actual bread, which basically sort of combine for a better product, is in enhancing the product, and ultimately saving us a lot of money. And when the pound signs come in, I'm certainly driven by that as an actual catering manager who got the control of the budget. So ultimately then we got a situation where, you know, it really is a massive sort of response to us, and it really is having the desired effects. So ultimately we turned around and sort of looked at the challenges that we got. We were busy operational, and additional internal auditing, you know, was always going to be a challenge. But I think once the changes were set up and it helped to consolidate the food production, it actually offset a lot of our time actually. And once the staff got that, I think it really sort of, you know, the additional work that was quite difficult. But, you know, as expected, we further progressed with that principle, and ultimately, as I said, the engagement factor really did work well. I think the creating awareness aspect of that, really, the engagement of students and staff was welcomed. I mean, we've got great teams here, even though students are actually engaged, and we've got various actual, you know, we talked about sort of Green Impact actual awards, which, you know, Heidi and her team have been sort of, you know, developing. I think there was something mentioned like 38 teams on the university, and a lot of that are student union actual sort of orientation, and students are really sort of ambassadors for that, and really sort of engage well with it. I communicate, as I mentioned earlier, in various meetings. You know, we are planning to show the plate waste savings in bags of sugar. I mean, I've seen other universities do that. As I said, you know, we do look at best practices as well. We are not actually sort of the, you know, the actual be on end all, but we are actually turning and driving this home really. And it certainly does communicate, and I think once you do see those results, and especially, you know, when the food quality is actually improved like it has been here, as well as financial benefits, as I keep referring to, I think that's always going to be beneficial. I mean, staff training, you know, staff are briefed regularly and encouraged to report, you know, if there are high volumes of food waste. Portion control is always going to be a challenge. We do get some staff that regard some of the students, and they give them the mother and another scoop of chips and another couple of sort of actual sort of, you know, containers of actual rice go out or whatever. So we've got to have those controls. I mean, it is closely monitored, but it is having desired effects. I mean, we do, as I mentioned, document waste sheets. We record all our waste in all our areas, and we do identify actually if there is significant actual areas, and it could be something simplistic, like we're actually serving a product which is not suitable for that actual area, but at least those control measures are in place really. Another thing which is going to sound as if I'm some type of actual sort of Scrooge, but ultimately we did introduce smaller plates, which made a big difference to our place wastage really. Financial benefits, I've mentioned those. We got commercial efficiency drives, and allow us to save money as we forward that. Also minimises food waste, so ultimately. So the overall impact we got with regards to that really, you know, these measures have led to an overall reduction in food waste, which is about 20% from the baseline, and sort of, you know, increasing, I guess. It's to help deliver costs of saving over 9,500 and increasing, and these are on procurement costs alone. So I mean, you know, it's terrific actual sort of overall impact on that really. And I think really the next steps that we've got really, we review and, you know, we get feedback. We still, you know, sort of look at menu planning, and it'll always be essential in that process. We're looking at, you know, towards the silver catering mark. How achievable it's going to be will be a major, you know, sort of challenge, no doubt. We share good practice, obviously, through these webinars, and I'm more than happy to actually sort of take questions. And it always is a challenge here, but ultimately we've got, you know, Environmental Association of Universities and Colleges to actually sort of work with, and this is where this webinar's, you know, taking place. We're looking at opportunities for redistribution. I think one of the important things is really that surplus food that we're looking at, you know, through you know, surplus sort of supplied to local charities for the homeless is something we're looking at, and also surplus foods, you know, some composting, which was mentioned earlier on. So there are other things that we need to actually turn on. So basically, that's it really for me, and I hope you managed to make some sense out of all that, really. But thanks very much.
Thanks, Les. That's fantastic. There's some really great actions and advice in there. And I think one of the things that stands out to me is sometimes it's the really simple things like the measuring and monitoring and just a simple review that identifies some really good opportunities. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly, in 5 minutes, just go through some other actions that you could take. And I could spend a whole hour on this subject, but I've only got about 5 minutes. So what I will do is signpost you to some further resources that RAP have that can help you. So I'll just quickly go through some sort of top tips, if you like, here. So what can you do to reduce food waste? And some of these have already been highlighted by Les. Simple things like preventing spoilage through effective stock management. So I'm sure you're familiar with things like, you know, first in, first out, labelling of ingredients, making sure that they're used before they have a chance to go off. Planning your menus. Again, I think that was highlighted by Les, was sort of using leftovers from one meal service as an ingredient in the next. So planning your menus ahead. Reducing preparation waste. Again, there's still lots that can be done on improving or more efficiently preparing fruits and vegetables and meats and fish, and there's some guidance on RAP's website and some tips on that. Managing variable demand. I mean, quite difficult for some organisations in university. You tend to know when your students are back in, but again, there's always some variability in there, so trying to forecast that as accurately as you can. Portion sizes, Les mentioned reducing plate sizes. That's a well-known, tried and tested sort of measure to reduce how much is put on people's plates, especially in buffet type scenarios when people help themselves. Separating food waste and for compost and OAD as well, again, something that both Les and Nick have touched upon at Swansea. So some top tips. Again, establishing a monitoring system for food waste. I think that's really come across quite clearly in the sort of things that Les was talking about. Until you actually start to monitor and look at how much you're producing, you can't really do much about preventing it. So starting that review is a really fundamental first step. One tip is to start using clear bags, so you can easily see what's food waste, what's packaging waste, and perhaps what could be avoided. And it's often quite surprising how much edible food waste is in the waste, and you can see it better in a clear bag. Another thing is reviewing the size of the bins that are used and how often these are being filled each day or each shift. Perhaps check if you can buy some items purchased in bulk. Again, that was mentioned by Les. Look at your units of measure and how you're purchasing your food in relation to how frequently you're using a particular ingredient. And another thing is also looking at your packaging, if that potentially could be returned to suppliers, or by rationalising your deliveries. As Les said, that's another way of reducing incoming packaging waste. So to summarise, one of the key things, you have to work out your baseline. If you're going to measure any progress, you need to understand what baseline you were starting out on. You need to build your support. We've talked to you about green teams, about having students involved, about staff training. There's lots of people which you'll need to have on board to help you implement any waste prevention plans. Work with those teams and the support you have to identify what those opportunities and actions are. I think across many different departments and restaurants, you can't do this by yourself. You need to involve lots of people in identifying what the greatest opportunities are. Keep them informed. Again, I think that's really important through green teams, through promoting the work that's been done. And linked to that is emphasising why. Les, you spoke quite clearly about the cost savings. Well, I think that's a really clear benefit that everyone can understand and perhaps respond better to than sort of other drivers is the fact that by doing this differently, you can save the organisation a lot of money that can be better spent elsewhere. And then going forward, as Swansea are doing, is continuing to measure, continuing to improve and report those successes. So some of that can be seen, ideas to sort of inspire you, is through some of RAP's taken action on waste information sheets. And again, there's a web link up on the slides there, so I would recommend you have a look at those information sheets. I'd also really recommend that you take a look at RAP's online resource centre for businesses. What this has is some interactive learning tools on which you can select sort of kitchens or restaurants or types of the business that might be applicable to you. And when you're live, these hotspots, the circles that you can see on the screen, when you hover over those, they give you a particular relevant tip on energy or water or waste, and you can click on those again as a way of signposting for further information. So again, just on some more of RAP's, some signposting to some further resources. There's some really good chef masterclass videos. They've got a chef, and it's sort of on YouTube, and you can get to it through these links, looking at how to reduce meat, fish and vegetable waste from a leading chef. Some really good, interesting videos there. There's more tips on cutting down on food waste on the info finder, food waste recycling at work, ideas to help you make savings there, and again, more chef masterclasses, getting the most out of your ingredients. So that's the sort of our part of it, and it's over to you now. I think we're probably going to hear from Emma first, and if anyone does have any questions, then we'd all be happy to answer those and have a further discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine, and thanks also to Les and Nick, of course. That was a really, really great and informative webinar. Yep, as Catherine said, this is now your opportunity. We've got about 10 minutes to ask any questions. There are a couple of ways of doing this. You can either type them into the chat box to everybody, or myself, or to Les, who's everybody there. Or you can actually let me know in the chat box, and I can unmute you, and you can ask your question aloud if you think that's a better, easier way of wording it. So I'll give you a minute or so now just to think about any questions. But if you do have one, if you let us know as soon as possible, and then we can get you an answer.
One of the questions, while you're having a think about any questions you might have, one of the ones that we get asked quite often when doing this kind of webinar is how do we actually start measuring and monitoring our food waste. And again, I know that you've done some work here and you've done some trials and some waste audits. And there's, again, on RAP's website, on their online resource centre, there's a lot of information on there on how to go about doing that. And projects that we've worked on with RAP in the past, it's sometimes something as quite simple as getting your staff to put stuff in buckets for the day rather than straight into the bin. Another tip is to split those buckets into, one is for preparation waste. You can have a bucket for plate waste, so that would suggest if most of your waste is coming back off your customer's plates, then perhaps portions is too big, or you're serving things that are not very popular. And then also waste that perhaps is from spoilage or things that haven't actually been served. So there's lots of different things. Have you got anything, Nez, on how you sort of, Nick, how you did that here?
Yeah, perhaps I can answer that, Nick, actually. What we did with it, I mean, we talked about baselines earlier on, really. What we did, we actually sort of like, and a tip that I'd give, really, if you're looking at this, is to look at doing it in piecemeal sizes, really. And, you know, and what we did with Fusion Restaurant, for instance, we looked at the evening service in there, actually. We serve up until 7 o'clock. And what we did with that, we started off actually before we rationalised and looked at the actual complete wastage, and we sort of invested in a weighing scale and weighed the actual plate waste that we were getting. And as I said, we reduced it from 6 to 4 actual main courses. And as I said, what we did with that, we had the actual recorded auditing sheets of where we were. Once we started actually weighing, we then started to actually look at the reductions in that. So ultimately, and that's where we got that, I think it was around about 30%. Which again, it was rationalisation, control of the actual sort of wastage, looking at batch cooking and all the processes that I mentioned in respect to get to that. And another thing to look at, this is one thing perhaps I didn't mention, is to look at market research and test all the time. You know, we would, you know, speak into the students, speak into our customers to see the products that we were given was the right product, because we've got massive internationalisation and students here. And actually turn around, I mentioned about Malaysian products, you know, and Malaysian food has become very, very sort of like cosmopolitan in our offer. So those were sort of contributing factors to that. But ultimately, when we started to see sort of massive improvements, it was a great driver. And of course, the main driver for me as well, I'm cash orientated, so at the end of the day, the financial impacts. And one thing I did forget to mention actually is that the savings there allowed us this year to actually, for the first time in many years, not put prices up right throughout our campus services, which is a massive marketing tool for all commercial business drivers, really. Okay,
thanks. We've had a couple more questions. First one is somebody asking if anyone uses a company that takes your food waste away to an anaerobic digester and the costs involved in this. Well, I was start off by saying that very much depends on where you're located. Some businesses that I've worked with, you know, they've got access as a local food waste recycling service. There will still be a cost in that. I think some people are sometimes quite surprised, and they think it's going to be taken away for free. Well, that's definitely not the case. There's still a cost in collecting and processing that. So I would say the first thing to do is speak to your waste management company and see what sort of facilities they're able to offer and what the cost of doing that would be. And again, there's some information on RAP's website about how to put in place a food waste recycling service and how to procure one as well. Okay, so we've got a few more questions coming in. Is there one that Nick you wanted to pick up there? Right, what are the viable options for food optimisation or redistribution, either on campus or within the local community? Les, you did mention that you're going to look at this, so I'm going to hand that one over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think we did actually look at this in some great detail, actually, and we were actually engaged with an actual local charity called Walech, and unfortunately, like we did actually sort of, the person we engaged with, we're just about to relaunch it. We've gone through actually all the legalities of this, which we had to get our actual legal team involved with, because obviously there are sort of potential negativities to this, and this was where we were struggling with this, really. We got to that stage, and unfortunately we lost contact with the person that was actually driving it. So we are actually open to looking at actually sort of engaging with local communities and the homeless, because we were looking at and again I talk about the sort of small piece meals really to actually turn on and develop. We were actually going to turn on and just actually start off with cold products, such as things like sandwiches, and we got packets of sushi and this type of stuff really. And then a part of our actual process would have been to actually sort of develop it into hot food. We had it all sorted out, and ultimately that went sort of a bit pear-shaped, unfortunately, in January. So we are looking to resurrect that. But again, that's part of our actual process in engaging with our actual our sustainability team, who actually sort of were the instigators there, to be fair. But we've managed to get all the actual sort of situations done, so we're waiting to go with that.
Okay, how did you
I'll just add to that. It's something we're very keen to do, but don't underestimate the legal and sort of practical implications of it. In terms of on campus, again, there's a lot of on-site catering for meetings, conferences, etc. And inevitably there's some wastage from there. We have a bit of an informal network of scavengers at the moment that come along and eat the remains of that, but it's something we've also thought about trying to formalise. I think it's something we'll look at this sort of the next couple of terms. So whether we have some sort of text message alert to people, so it sort of gets eaten at the moment, but in an informal way. But we're thinking we could set up a project around sort of interested people who need an alert if there's free food on campus.
Okay, I think we can squeeze in one more, and then I understand from Emma that the questions will be sort of answered as a follow-on. So one of the questions is on finding a way in to engage with a catering team that perhaps not very interested and sort of perhaps respond initially to say that they don't produce any waste food. Well, I think one way of doing that is to try and get them to do that trial that I mentioned earlier, because until people start separating food waste, they are often not really generally aware of how much they produce. Les, how have you sort of managed that here? And I know, Nick, you mentioned the green teams. Have you found that sort of a very useful thing to try and get them engaged on?
Yeah, to be honest, I think, you know, one of the things is engagement. I mean, the negatives, and that was the challenge, and I think most actual sort of, you know, hospitality and catering businesses will find the same. And the thing is, I mean, when people say they don't waste food, I think if you've got the audit systems going on, you can actually physically show them what the wastage is and get them engaged to that. I think also another thing to actually mention, I think, what we're going to roll out for the future is actually incentivise it, because we've got teams here, you know, really, which are very, very sort of, there's a lot of friendly competition goes on, really, and we actually turn around and look at sort of things like financial impact to what it does in these units, and we actually do things like, you know, employee of the term, team of the term, which incentivises it, and one of those things of incentivising could be that minimising food wastage. And that could actually be one of the parts of the incentives that actually turn on and drive that, because we give certificates and maybe a box of chocolates and stuff, and that, but it really does actually sort of engage, and it really does give an actual emphasis of people being proud of what they're doing. And one thing I would say, just back to basics really, you need to get out on the floor and actually check. And if people are saying there's no wastage, you should be able to overview that. And I do that by overviewing to make sure that you get the finger on the pulse of that one, really. No criticism, but ultimately back to the floor, really, and check to say, once somebody's saying something, you can actually physically check through visual checks with that. But that would work for us, and certainly they're going to be, as I said, we're not the finished article, but it will be a situation where competition, friendly competition, would be suddenly incentivised, and that would actually turn around and certainly work, I'm sure.
Thanks, Les.
Lovely,
Okay,
thank you, Les.
The last slide up on there, which is the link to where a lot of this information can be found, and as Emma has said, I think she will be passing on some remaining questions. Is that right, Emma?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether you guys, I think it was just one or two questions left, whether you mind just quickly answering them. Obviously more detail can be given later. It's just while we've got this opportunity at the moment, it's really great to engage this way.
Sure. One of the questions then is about savings on unseen costs. So obviously the cost of reducing waste that's been disposed of is quite easy to measure, but whether the reduction in food waste itself is a direct saving of waste going to landfill or other cost savings, is probably what we call the sort of true cost of waste. So is that something that you've noticed, Les, in sort of purchase costs? If you're obviously wasting less food, you should be buying less food to start with. Is that something you can measure?
Yeah, well, the thing is that I'd probably reverse that, because I think one of the points I made, I think, was really that the drive of actually using sort of batch cookery and actual fresh products has actually increased our actual sales so far this year by 8%. So in terms of actual sort of changes to this, which has driven it as another driver, we actually turn around and see that we've got better margins, in profit margins that is, and ultimately our sales have actually increased. So I think really with regards to that, difficult to manage because we're actually going through more food actually. So I think what we have got with that, I think in terms of actual sort of reduction, very difficult, but we've seen, you know, reductions to plate waste, and I think it's just a continual monitoring of that. But what we have seen, the flip side of that coin is, we've actually increased our sales, and I think with regards to that, it's been a wonderful sort of thing for us from a commercial business perspective, as well as the actual sort of customer getting a better product.
I think that's all the questions that we had on the screen, Emma. I think.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, no, I think that was it. I think that was just one more in there from Aberystwyth. Okay, I was just typing out a message to everyone, but I'll say it out loud now. Obviously, I'd just like to thank our speakers today, and I'm sure that everyone attending today's webinar would agree that it was a really, really brilliant one. To our attendees today, thank you for coming, thank you for booking on. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I will be sending you an email later with a link to today's recorded webinar, as well as your certificate of attendance. And yeah, brilliant. Thanks again to everyone. If you have any more questions, feel free to drop me an email later on, and I'll sort of connect you guys all up. But thank you again, and hopefully see you all on the next webinar.